Hey guys, welcome back to our DevLog series, a guide to making indie games. Each week I share a little bit of the game I'm working on, as well as giving some important lessons on how you can make your own games. It turns out a lot of you really like this series, so from now on these videos will be uploaded directly to my channel. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more, and let's get started. So last week was a very bare bones start to our project. We began putting together a design document, we created a sort of mood board full of things that inspire us, and we started testing a small prototype for our game. Personally, I'm making a platformer where you have to speedrun each level. Today, we're going over something a bit less concrete. We're going to find the fun in our game. Anyone can have ideas, but the true magic of game development is turning an idea into something fun. If we can't figure this out right away, to be honest, the game just isn't worth making. Let's talk about what fun means, because I think it's harder to fully understand when it comes to video games. If you play a game like Pac-Man, for example, where does the fun come from? It might be the strive to get a better score, the thrill of outrunning ghosts, the satisfying feeling of eating those ghosts. That's easy, but what about a game like Final Fantasy? There's a lot more moving pieces. I guess you could say there's fun in managing your party for combat or following an exciting story, but these are much bigger concepts that take a lot of work before they yield any results. So depending on what your game is, the fun can range dramatically. Here's my advice: think about the game you're trying to make. What purpose does it serve? Why are people going to be playing it? Your number one goal right now should be figuring that out. If it's your combat system, start building it. Figure out what works and what doesn't work. If you're making a visual novel, start writing the story. Find out if this story is actually worth exploring. Just a reminder that it's a good idea to write these ideas down in your design document so you can reference them later. The good news about platformers is that they are arguably the easiest genre when it comes to finding the fun. For me, I think players will have the most fun trying to get the best possible time while speedrunning a level. Therefore, the most important thing for me to focus on right now is game feel. What's game feel, you ask? Well, it's how your game feels to play. I'll give you an example. I think the best way to make a platformer feel good to play is by having responsive and satisfying controls. Let's start with that. So back in the project, the first thing I did was start messing around with my character's movement and jumping mechanics. I modified the gravity scale and force of my jumps until I landed on something that felt a bit more natural but still had a bit of that floaty feel. I also realized that I actually wanted to be more precise with the jumps, so I decided to make a very simple tile set in order to test jump heights. After running through a couple of level tests, the player felt a lot better to control. The other thing that really needs work done is the projectiles. Right now they are about as bare bones as a projectile mechanic could possibly be, so I wanted to change that. I started by giving the mouse a crosshair to improve the feeling of aiming. I also sped up the projectiles just slightly and then tested a sort of shooting range level. Still, it felt like this wasn't enough of a meaningful mechanic to make it part of the game, so more experimenting was necessary. I decided to lean a bit more heavily into the crosscode inspiration and made the projectiles bounce off walls. Now instead of destroying instantly, the projectile bounces 5 times before being destroyed, or at least until a set timer runs out. Finally, I made some new tiles and obstacles for the player to avoid, and voila, we have ourselves a pretty solid prototype level. One of the biggest challenges I've had to overcome as a game developer is feeling overwhelmed. Eventually, when I start to add all of these moving pieces like animations, scripts, and prefabs, there's this part of my brain that tells me I should stop experimenting. There's a fear that changing one thing or adding something else could completely ruin what you've already built, and I'm sure I'm going to feel that a lot more further down the line as this game grows, but it's also something you just have to get over. Game dev is like painting in a way. You start out with a completely blank canvas and slowly cover it with something meaningful through hard work. Eventually you get to a point where adding a simple seagull could completely change the painting. So instead of taking a risk and trying it, you just leave it alone. I guess my point is, you should paint that seagull. Taking risks and testing ideas is the only way to make any real progress as a game dev. Who knows, the seagull could be the best thing to ever happen to your game. Even if it doesn't work, at least now you know and you can just paint over it later. With this in mind, I took a risk and decided to add a bit more depth to the projectiles. I wanted to see if adding a visual trajectory that bounces off walls would change anything. I knew that this would be complex. I haven't really worked with line renderers errors before, and there was a chance that it wouldn't work out in the end, but there's only one way to find out. So I spent about an hour coding, playing around with the concept. I struggled a lot, and I decided that a mechanic like this could wait. It just felt like a lot of effort for something that wasn't really necessary yet, and there's a lot more stuff that I can be focusing on right now. Originally, I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I think it really drives home the point that it's okay if things don't work out. It took me like less than a minute to bring it back to where I was before, so I think at least trying things is always worth it. Chances are I will come back to this, but more important things first. So now that I have the raw essentials of my prototype set in place, it's time to step back and see the bigger picture. We have to ask ourselves, is what we have worth building a full game around? Of course, I plan to add unique hazards and level designs to keep things interesting, but are these base mechanics by themselves meaningful enough? To be completely honest, I think there's certainly potential here, but it doesn't feel like anything new yet. I'm also a little worried that running, jumping, and shooting could get old after a little while. I need something to really shake up the formula and add variety to the gameplay. So it's time to look back at our mood board. You might notice that it's grown a bit. When you get new ideas or play a game that inspires you, I think that you should add it to your design document. Remember, this should be a place with a wealth of ideas for the taking. If you ever feel stumped, you come here for a little help. So I wanted to find a mechanic or idea that added a little more depth to the game. The first thing I did was look at other platformers. Hollow Knight is one of my favorite games of all time, and a big reason for that is how it feels to play. I like that you start out feeling kinda slow as you learn the basics, but after a while you unlock some new mechanics to alter the way you play the game. I love that idea, but I'm not making a Metroidvania, so I'm just gonna hold on to some basic concepts like the double jump, the dash, and the ground slam. Neon White is another game that is a huge inspiration for the speedrunning side of my game. Something I really like about Neon White is the discard mechanic, where you can throw away your gun to use some sort of platforming action. So here's what I came up with. I decided to make classic 2D Mario style power-ups that you can pick up and discard like Neon White, which activates an ability such as the dashing mechanic from Hollow Knight. It's a big cluster of random ideas thrown into a pot and mixed together, but I think it could be pretty cool, so let's try it. First, I made some stand-in art for the power-ups, just simple circles with arrows on them. We're gonna call these powers for now. The idea was to have 5 different options for you to work from, 4 different dashing directions, and one that stops your momentum completely, freezing you in place. Setting up these mechanics was actually super easy because I already had physics-based movement to begin with. I then set up the obstacle course to test the powers, and voila! Things are finally getting interesting. I actually really like these powers. I think there's a lot of potential to use them in fun platforming scenarios, and hopefully introduce more powers slowly throughout the game. I haven't quite decided how it'll relate to the story just yet. I have a couple ideas, but that's something that can wait for now. So in about a week, I think we've made some pretty big progress on our game. If you're making your own game, the homework for this week is to find the fun. There are so many different kinds of games out there, so this could mean something different for everybody, but I want you to find something worth latching on to. If you're making a story-driven game, write some of the story and get yourself hooked. If you're making a puzzle game, try to make the puzzles feel satisfying to solve. There are so many other elements to game feels, such as art direction, sound design, level design. These are things that we can talk about later. Next week, I want to do a little crash course on character design and animation, so look forward to that. One final note before you leave, I want to shout out my new Discord server. A bunch of other game developers have joined already. If you want some help with your games or just want to show them off, consider joining. The link is down in the description. We'd love to have you. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys very soon. Peace.